Friends, welcome. My name is Sharon Conley Cottingham, and I serve as the Director of E-Learning Design for Upper Room Ministries. And I am here with Rob Fuquay tonight and excited to be introducing to you the Upper Room's new resource, church-wide resource for worship and study series called The God We Can Know, the I Am Sayings of Jesus. This is a church-wide initiative. We have pieces for adults and for children and for youth. It's our desire to walk with you, to journey with you as a congregation or even as an individual and come to know God through Jesus' I Am sayings. As I said, I'm here tonight with Rob Fuquay, and Rob, welcome. We are glad you're here.
Thanks.
Long drive from Indianapolis today.
Not bad, except for one backup on I-65, but it's always good to be back in Nashville. And the first thing I want to say is welcome to the people who are tuned in tonight. I think we had a really good response of folks registering for the webinar. And this is my first webinar. Is it your first?
It is not my first.
It's not your first, it's my first. So it's good to be here. And as Sharon said, I'm the senior pastor at St. Luke's United Methodist Church in Indianapolis, where I have been for just over 3 years, almost 3.5 years now. I'm a native of North Carolina, born and raised in Winston-Salem, and I think my mom might be watching tonight. So, I didn't play professional sports, so I never got to say, hi, Mom, to the camera. So I get to do that tonight. That was my one chance. And anyway, grew up in Winston-Salem and served different churches of different sizes, from a 2-point charge to a larger church in the conference, until moving to Indianapolis. And for any of our folks back home in Indy, hello to them tonight. It's good to be here.
And Rob, I was watching people register this afternoon and realized there are really folks from all over the country here with us. And so there's a great degree of interest in this content that we're offering.
Nice.
Rob, I remember meeting you probably 2 years ago or so at Soul Feast, which is the Upper Room's annual spiritual formation conference held in Lake Junaluska, familiar territory for you. And it was there that you preached a series of sermons, or taught, I guess we could say, a series on the I Am Sayings of Jesus. Right. So what I know of the original vision for this resource is that it came out of these talks at Soul Feast. Tell us a little bit more about your side of the story for this original vision.
That is where it started, and that was one of my first introductions to Soul Feast and being able to be a part of the whole event that week. And it's such a great conference put on by the Upper Room each year. And I had the benefit of being the morning teacher for the theme that week, which was the I Am Sayings of Jesus. So in preparing the material and working on that material, I just got really excited about the things I was learning, the application points that were coming to me as I got ready for it. And then out of that experience that week at Soul Feast, looked at using that for a Lent series back at St. Luke's the next year. And every year we try to do an all-church experience, which simply means take the morning worship services and write material that goes with the messages for small groups. It's a great way to try to get new people who maybe have come into the church in recent months, plug them into a small group, but also tie in children and youth with everybody doing this together. And was really excited about how well that material worked for what we try to do in Lent every year. And out of that came conversations, again, with Upper Room about turning this into something that other churches could use.
Well, and what I love here is the partnership. The Upper Room has been publishing a daily devotional guide for 80 years.
Right.
As we know, that's what most of us are familiar with, is that little daily devotional guide. But the intent of it was that people come together around Scripture, around a devotional thought together, and that whole families, whole churches be centered around this content together. So even though this is sort of a new idea for the Upper Room to do a church-wide piece that involves all the layers of the congregation, we've really been doing that for years, when you think about it that way. But I'm wondering why the I Am Sayings, Rob, and why that particular content. What drew you to that? What were you thinking when you went that direction?
Well, like I say, it started with the fact that was a given theme given to me for the Soul Feast week. And working on the material and thinking about what we might be doing the next year in Lent at St. Luke's, I just realized that in a season when we really give intentional focus to helping people deepen their relationship with Jesus Christ, and using that time as like an annual spiritual checkup, just like going to the doctor. How am I doing? We try to make that an annual checkup time, pull together synergy for the whole church doing this together. I found the material of the I Ams was very powerful. Great material for pulling in Old Testament stories and background settings to the content of the words that Jesus used. And then, like I said before, application points that these truths had great relevance to people's lives today. So they touched on very real issues that could make anybody go, I can relate to that. And regardless of where you are in your walk of faith, we just found that the messages in each of the week's themes with the I Am sayings had great power and impact for deepening people's relationship with Christ, thinking about where they are spiritually, some takeaway action points to say you can do these things to deepen your relationship with Christ and with others. So, we just got inspired around that. Then out of that series, coming back with the Upper Room, talking about what the Upper Room's mission is to help those very things happen in people's lives. We found opportunity to put together a resource that other churches could use.
Yeah, and the synergy, I think, has been a beautiful thing. There are many people that have been involved in the development of this. We've had web developers, we've had a film crew, and I'm going to have you talk about that in just a minute. We have Heather Harris, who wrote the children's piece, Whitney Booth, who wrote the young adult piece. And so this whole group of people that have been together around this. And when we talk a little bit later about implementation and how to use this church-wide, I think there's great benefit in pastor having the chance to actually lead and pastor the congregation and use a resource that will facilitate the content that you want to get out, but you then don't have to be caught up in kind of creating it all and getting it all out there. And we can talk more about that later. I want to talk particularly about your experience in the Holy Land. And I think what I want to start with is just a video clip so that people can get a sense of, I think, what the intent was of these videos, which is to take us there with you. You and some folks from St. Luke's were able to go to the Holy Land. A couple of people from the Upper Room went along and actually went to the locations where Jesus, we suppose, spoke these I Am sayings, or at least the locations that were referred to. And really give us as an audience a sense of being there, live and there. And so I want to show just a section of the second session, which is I Am the Bread of Life, and Jesus talking, really leading us into an awareness of what it means to be satisfied, what it means to be full and satisfied in Christ. And so just 3 minutes, it's just a half of the video. The rest of the video you'll get a chance to look at really after our time together tonight. But take a look. And then we'll talk a little bit more about your time in the Holy Land.
You have everybody on the edge of their seats on that.
Is it ever a struggle for you to feel satisfied, or to be whole or complete or even fulfilled? If so, then today's I Am saying should be very meaningful. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. To appreciate those words, we have to start here. According to the Bible, something very important happened here a long time ago. I'm standing on the Mount of Beatitudes. Behind me, you can see the beautiful Roman Catholic Church built in the 1930s that commemorates the site where Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount. It was very near this location where Jesus was teaching one day, and thousands of people showed up to listen to him. The Bible says 5,000 men. Counting women and children, that could have been 15,000 people. Jesus was teaching, and they became hungry. The disciples wanted Jesus to send the people away. Sometimes it's easier to ask God to get rid of our problems than to help us face them. Jesus wanted to help the disciples face the problem. The disciples brought to Jesus what they had, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Notice what happens next. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. I love that part of the story. Jesus gave thanks before they ate, when they didn't even have enough to eat. But of course, they ended up with plenty, and not only that, they had leftovers. Besides the resurrection, this is the only miracle story told in all 4 Gospels. Obviously, what happened here was very important. But according to the Gospel of John, it's what happens next that's even more significant. Come with me to that location as we continue the story.
So Rob, a quick word about how someone might use this DVD, but then I really want to hear about your experience there.
Sure.
But the DVD can be used as a standalone. So you might show a video and then go through a study guide, set of study guide questions just to get a conversation prompted.
Right.
A little bit deeper, a little bit more content around the video itself would be to read the chapter from the book and then have a little bit more to talk about. But Rob, you were there. Tell us about your experience in the Holy Land. Tell us about your experience with this particular content, I am the bread. We want to hear about your story.
Well, the overall experience was outstanding. It had been 27 years since I had been to the Holy Land. I had the chance to study there for a month when I was in seminary. So it had been a long time, and it was quite fascinating to see how much had changed in that time. We had a local film crew from Israel do all the filming, and 3 fairly young guys, really, really wonderful fellas. They filmed the Israeli version of the show Survivor, Israeli Survivor, so it's pretty cool to have them as a part of it. But just the experience of being in a setting where Jesus actually said the words, I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, I am the good shepherd, and so on. I mean, it just brings home the deeper meaning of the passages and the stories that you don't get from just reading it. And so the hope was in these videos that it would help to make that connection, that the videos would take like words in a book, but now make it more experiential. So we wanted to do this in a way that it would draw people in and feel like, hey, I'm there. I'm experiencing being a part of this. And I think the film crew did an outstanding job, and the folks who were part of the editing in doing that, because as I watched it, I thought, wow, it really does give people a sense of being a part of it. So your question about that particular session, I am the bread of life, we started at the Church of the Beatitudes, which is very near the area that commemorates the feeding of the 5,000, which could have been 15,000 because it talks about 5,000 men. And it's out of that experience where Jesus says to a crowd of people, I'm the bread of life, because 24 hours after that miracle, he goes to the village of Capernaum where people follow him there. And in chapter 6 of the Gospel of John, they basically ask Jesus, okay, that was yesterday's miracle. What about today? What are you going to do for us now? And I talk about the real life settings that are going on around Jesus when he says these words, and then think about how do they apply to our lives, and try to end those sessions asking questions like, have you ever been here? Not thinking literally about the physical place, but the spiritual place that applies to any area.
And Rob, one of the things I've really appreciated about the way that flow happens in your writing and then combined with the video is that historical cultural setting is made real clear, and simple to access. So it's
Right.
very accessible. You don't have to be a trained seminary student, theologian. Someone coming in new to the church, new to the faith, could grasp what
Right.
you're teaching us. But then there's this move into sort of a personal story anecdote, which gets us knowing you a little bit better. And sometimes one of your parishioners, who maybe was the willing person to have their story told in your book. But then there's that move, as you said, to the very personal. Have you ever been here?
Right.
Have you ever experienced this? And I find that pattern really helps to take that I am saying's content and move it beyond just the cerebral, the knowing. I
Yeah.
know what this means, to what about me? Where does this connect with me? And I think there's some real power in that, both, like I said, for those of us who are seminary trained, for
Right.
those of us who have been in
Right.
the church for a long time, also, though, for the new person who's really just trying to come to know Jesus.
Well, think about that particular session again. Jesus goes to Capernaum. The crowd follows him, and they're wanting more.
Yeah.
And so they talk about the manna in the wilderness. Well, Moses brought bread from heaven, and what can you do?
Yeah.
And if you think about that, think about the story of the manna. That's kind of comical, because in the wilderness, what did the people do? Well, they were satisfied for a day or two,
Right.
and then they said, "Haven't you got something besides manna? What can you give me now?" Well, here are people that many years later saying to Jesus, "Well, we want the manna." And Jesus gets to the deeper level where drives come from, which is, I'm looking for satisfaction. I'm trying to find it in something in the material world, and Jesus is taking them to a spiritual place, which is what happens. So, in working on this material, I can't help but think in my life what that looks like. And I think of something as simple as going to the refrigerator before going to bed because I'm a
Which
little
you
hungry.
share about in the book.
And I
Right.
open the refrigerator door, and so I tell on myself a little bit, but if I were to go drag my children into it, I could really tell on my kids. When they stand at a refrigerator full of food and say, "We don't have any food in the house." And of course I've done that, and lots of people have done that. Because why? Well, we look for something, we want to satisfy us, to fill us, we can't find it. Jesus is saying, I can give you something that's a deeper level of satisfaction than where you're trying to find it right now. And so when you ask the question, have you ever been there? Have you ever been in that place? Well, it gives anybody who's a part of a small group reading the material, or even if you haven't read the book, you've watched this video, you can think about in doing your own little personal checkup with God, where am I right now in my search for satisfaction? If I were rating my life on a 1 to 10 satisfaction meter, what would I give myself? And what would Jesus say about that? And what would Jesus want to do to help me raise that a little bit?
And Rob, I think for that pastor or for that church leader who is trying to span that spectrum of connection between the person who's walked into the church for the first time and really knows little about the biblical narrative or little about Jesus, to that person who has been to church
Right.
since the cradle,
Right.
and really is at a point where they need to be challenged to a deeper step, a deeper move. I think what you're saying is here, it's exactly what Jesus does. He talks to us in these metaphors that are simple on one hand to understand and yet very profound and deep on another. And I think that's what this material is offering.
Sure.
It's offering that new to the church world person a very accessible introduction to Jesus. But then that person who needs to take that, what does it mean to be satisfied,
right.
to a whole deeper level, there's
Well,
something there for them
I
as
mean,
well.
you understand that. I mean, that's the challenge in worship every week, isn't
course.
it? You've got this sea of people where their spiritual experiences across the board. How do you preach a message that might relate to somebody walking in the door for the first time and talk to somebody who's been in the church his or her entire life and they know a lot about the faith in the Bible? And so as a pastor, that's what excited me about extending this material to a larger audience than just my own church, because I crave stuff like that as a pastor. What can I provide that might be a meaningful experience for an array of people in their own spiritual development? And I have found in St. Luke's that this certainly resonated with people across the board. And in a small group, sometimes people who they're further along in their Christian study, their understanding of doctrine, their reading of theologians.
Yeah.
Well, those folks tend to band together, don't they?
They do.
They're in a small group.
Yeah.
They can take this material and then relate to their own readings
Right.
or their understanding of other theologians
And you
kind
quote
of
from
take each
people
other
like
up.
Philip Newell and Barbara Brown Taylor and Karl Barth. So we get that.
Sure.
But we also get that, here's the metaphor.
If you, yeah,
Yeah.
if all you know are sports personalities and talk show
Right.
hosts, in a sense, this can still relate to people at that level to say, how do you relate to these topics of looking for satisfaction, needing guidance, looking for a deeper sense of strength and power in your life?
Now, one of the things that I was both impressed by and interested by is in that very first session, you talked to a rabbi from Indianapolis who I believe is a friend of yours,
Sure.
David Sasso. Tell us a little bit about that. And I'm also curious to know what, in your connection with him, how did that deepen or
get in this?
widen your
Yeah.
understanding of the I am sayings?
Dennis and I are a part of a clergy group. We meet once a month, and we all serve congregations in the north part of Indianapolis. We have 2 rabbis of 2 different congregations, a couple of Muslim clerics, Presbyterian pastors, Episcopal priests, Methodists, and I have found it is the neatest fellowship. We share about first of all, it's amazing how much we share in common, you know, just as clergy, you know, in these different faith groups. But got to know Dennis early on in my time in Indianapolis. So I was at one of our breakfast gatherings 2 years ago and talked about this material, taking a trip to Israel. And he said, oh, that's wonderful. You know, the I ams of Jesus are all symbols used for Torah. And I nodded and went, well, of course I know that. Tell me more about your understanding of that, Dennis. So he starts talking about the I am symbols, light, the vineyard, bread, shepherd, way, that these are images for the Jewish people of Torah. Well, I held on to that. And then as this material came together more and we started talking about a DVD, I thought it'd be fun to tie Dennis back into it. And we had the chance to go to his congregation in the sanctuary and have him explain. And until that moment, I didn't fully get it, that if you worship in a Jewish congregation, you see the symbols of the I am sayings every week. And he pointed them out to us. And so people, they see that in the video, and it's just kind of neat for folks how they might just gain a deeper appreciation of Jewish worship.
Well, and chapter 1 launches not in the book of John, which we might expect given that all these I am sayings are from the book of John, but from Exodus. And why do you start there?
Well, and we use that, of course, I already shared that this we used in the season of Lent. It's not limited to Lent, but it does appropriate itself really well for the Lenten season. So we started on Ash Wednesday as a way to introduce it. We begin with Moses, who was the first person to hear God say the words, I am. I am who I am. And we begin there and we think about Moses' experience and what did it mean for Moses to hear those words. Moses wasn't volunteering for this job. He didn't want to have anything to, he's begging for a way out. So when he's going, I don't even know your name, God, you know, what can you give me there? God says, I am. Well, in my study on that, looking at what it means, Everett Fox has a wonderful comment on this in his commentary, that a literal translation is, I will be there as I will be there. Oh, that's a little different twist. In other words, the promise to Moses is, you want to speak eloquently, you want confidence, you want respect, that everybody's just going to follow you because you show up. I'm not going to give you that. I'm going to give you myself. I will be there. Is that enough for you? Am I enough for you? Well, that's another one of those that for people today, have you ever stood there at Sinai? Have you ever stood in that place where you want God to give you more material blessing, more confidence, more authority, more whatever it is? And sometimes we don't get that, And what God's saying is, I am who I am. Will you let me be enough for you? Great, great conversation stuff.
Well, and this material challenges us over and over again to confront those questions at whatever level we are ready or able to confront those questions.
Right.
And to do it in a setting with other people. One of the opportunities we're going to offer with the God We Can Know is for people who can't come back physically to engage in a small group in their church to join remotely online
Right.
and have some online small group offerings. But it might be within a small group sitting in church. It might also be an individual who picks up the book and simply wants to go through those reflection questions on his or
Sure.
her own and find some personal connection with them.
You know, that is a great
Yeah.
thing about the way the Upper Room put this material together so that it's not all so dependent on each other.
Yeah.
You know, things can stand alone. You can read the book. You don't even have to be doing it as a part of an experience in your church. Just in reading the book and thinking about those reflection questions. If you are doing this in a church, you come to a small group, but you haven't read the book.
Right.
Well, the material in the video itself, each session, is standalone.
Yeah.
But if you're doing it all, it deepens the experience
Right.
even better.
Yeah, yeah. And like we said earlier, should the whole church opt to engage in this together, then those who are usually leading and creating material and
Right.
trying to get promotional material and trying to do, then can, like I said, focus on the development and training of leaders, can focus on pastoring the congregation, and the material is there
Yeah.
for them to follow and the guide's there for them to follow.
In being a together,
Mm-hmm.
which was a fun experience, I thought about what have I appreciated as a
Mm.
pastor when I'm looking at a resource to use in the church, and occasionally, at least once a year during the season of Lent, or maybe at other times, what really helps me. And so when I can have material to give to people who will volunteer to facilitate, because I find lots of people in church say, I don't know enough to teach. You know, I'm not
But
an authority on the
facilitating
Bible.
is a different thing.
Exactly. When
Yeah.
you can give ready-made
Yes.
material. all
Here's
you've
the
got-
guide to follow,
all
which
you've
is
gotta do
what's
is follow
right
it.
here in the study guide's actually a part of the DVD package.
Right.
So the videos as well as a guide that's easy to
Inside the
follow
packet,
for any
right.
facilitator to go through. You know, I got to thinking, Rob, when you were talking about Rabbi Sasso, wondering about the I am sayings for you. Is there one that stands out for you? Perhaps challenges you more so than the others? I'm just curious to
Yeah.
know how you've wrestled with these yourself.
You know, each of them were really deeply meaningful to me. Talking about the bread of life, to be in those settings where they were spoken, like we saw. The light of the world, and understanding all that was going on around Jesus, religiously and politically, when he said those words. And tying them back into the history of Israel because of the Feast of Tabernacles that was going on at the time when he said them. I am the true vine. You know, I personally related to that one very well as a time in my life when I was empty. I was empty and saying to God, I don't know that I'm capable to do what I'm doing right now. And so I tell a little bit about that in the book. So those are very meaningful. The one that's very challenging is I am the way, the truth, and the life. First of all, how do you deal with all of that in one chapter and in one message? I mean, there's way, there's
Right.
truth, there's life.
Right.
There's a lot packed in there. We focused on way for theological reasons because the angle I take here is that Jesus is talking to his followers, not to a large crowd, and certainly not to people of different religious beliefs. He's talking to his followers, and what Jesus does over and over again is not say to people, believe this, understand that. He says, follow me. He's talking about his life as a way. So the way that this passage gets used because of the verses that follow it, no one comes to the Father except through me. That's where it becomes very contentious and used by some as a club to say, boy, that group's not legitimate. They don't accept Jesus. This group's not legitimate. So in other words, a Christian cannot recognize the legitimacy of other religions. That makes that one very, very tough and challenging. But we try to deal with this. Now, I say that it was tough. It was also my most enjoyable video.
And why?
The day we filmed that, we were packing a lot into the day. And we wanted this shot where I could talk about that very issue and have over one shoulder the Dome of the Rock, one of the holiest Muslim sites in the world. And then over another shoulder, the Western Wall, a very, very holy Jewish site. And then be able to say, and just down the street is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the place commemorated as Jesus' crucifixion and death. And many scholars would say that is most likely the place that happened. And talk about, hey, right in this location, I mean, this is the point of the greatest tension
tensions of the world.
for the major monotheistic beliefs in the world. And we couldn't find that location.
Yeah.
We couldn't find that spot. And the day's growing short, the sun is starting to set, and the film crew finds this rooftop that would give us that view, but they had to climb over a wall to get on it. Well, we just passed some Israeli soldiers with their rifles, and they said, we're going to film up here, and they start handing the stuff over and start pulling me up, and I said, well, what about the soldiers? And they said, we'll shoot quick. And I thought, so will they. So that one is just fun to look back at and think about. The sun was rising on me. We had to get that before the shadows hit, and hoping that somebody doesn't come around the corner and does who knows what. But it was just an amazing spot to be in, literally hundreds of feet above the plaza in front of the Western Wall, looking at the sun hitting the top of the Dome of the Rock. And I kind of got back to the room that night with all of the experiences I had that day, and I went, did I really live this day? Did I have all of these experiences in one day? I mean, it was incredible.
And I've not physically been to the Holy Land. And so watching these videos, and I've seen the one that you just referred to, seen that shot. And now that I know a bit more of the story behind it, it enlivens it all the more. But there is something about these videos that for those of us who have not gone or perhaps cannot go, allows us a bit of it, a little taste of what it was like. And I do think, Rob, that there's something in our sensory engagement. It's the sights and the sounds, and perhaps not the smells on video, but the idea of being able to in some way be there where Jesus spoke.
Yeah.
That enriches this, and I don't even know how to describe it in words.
Sure.
But there's an enriching that goes on to those experiences, and I would
Well,
imagine you felt that while you were there.
Absolutely. And let me just say, like, why were we doing this? Was it just to do something
question.
fun?
Right.
Was it to do something gimmicky?
Yeah.
No. As a pastor, I am hungry to find material that helps Christ become real to people in a way that's life-changing. And what excites me about this becoming such that other churches can use it is I know that this material provides opportunity where people, through worship, meeting in small groups, Christ just becomes real to them. I had a couple of experiences, one during the time we were doing this in our church. When we talked about Jesus as the Good Shepherd and the investment of the shepherd and the sheep, and how is Christ invested in us. I had a woman come to me that week who couldn't talk to me without, tearing up. And she told about growing up with a lot of abuse and how she's never felt worthy. And then the things that she's done in her life to try to find worth. And she said, I've just always heard the message in church, God loves me, God believes in me. Something just broke through. Something broke through in a new way, that God is invested in me, that I'm worth investing in. And I mean, it gets me thinking about that. Here's a person who's been in church a long time saying, for the first time, I get it, that God finds me worth investing in. That's incredible. Yesterday, I get a check from a guy, and he says, here's my tithe check. And I think, well, I need to know more about this. So I get him on the phone. And I said, so I'm thankful for the gift to the church, but tell me more about this. Well, he related to something I said in one of the sermons. Now, this has been a while back now. Right. And in one of the messages, talking about satisfaction, what are things we can do to deepen our trust in God's ability to take care of us? And I just sort of offhandedly threw out this idea of tithing. I said, if you don't tithe, I want to just invite you to right now decide for a month, just for a month, I'm going to tithe. And I said, to show you that I'm not a cheap salesman trying to get money for the church, do not give any of it to the church. You tithe to other places that are important to you, because the purpose is to see what it does for you in your walk with God. So he said to me on the phone yesterday, I did that. I thought, I'm going to take a chance. I've given before, but I've never been close to tithing. So I took you up on the deal. And he said, and you know what? It's changed my life. It has changed my life. So he told me all the places he gives, and he gives some to the church because he wants that to be part of it. And that, to me, is what excites me about this resource.
Well, and Rob, I think that's where the partnership with the Upper Room, that's where there was this beautiful dovetail. I don't know any of us who work there who are authors or editors or web developers or the multiple other roles that we fill at the Upper Room. I don't know that any of us are there for any other reason, that we long for people to have a deep and profound connection with God at whatever level is appropriate for them. And I think, again, I'm probably repeating myself, but one of the things about this particular series that affords for that is this, it's easy access.
Right.
It is accessible, it's in language that we can understand, and it does what the Upper Room's done for years. It invites people to spiritual practice, whether it be individual spiritual practice or corporate spiritual practice. And so, I'm wondering about St. Luke's and what your experience was at St. Luke's with having all of this.
That's what I was thinking about, you know, like what happened with us as we used this material. And so each week having some practical takeaways, what are practices I can incorporate in my life, or what are challenges or things I can go do. That had great impact. Many times I've done this before where we just keep it at the adult level, like get adults in small groups, they experience it in worship. We decided to make this as all-inclusive as possible. So we developed material for children, for youth, of course for the adults. We made the worship more multi-sensory. We have some folks who are just so creative that I didn't even realize it until we invited people to be a part of creating sets. So we cleared out the pulpit, that whole area of the chancel. For instance, here's a good one. When we did the setting of Jesus saying, I am the light of the world, we talked about how it was in the temple courtyard on the night of grand illumination when these giant torches were lighted. So this guy builds these cardboard torches that look like they're granite. He puts a small fan under each one with these orange silk material, and it looks like flames the whole time I'm preaching. You know, and so each week we had that kind of a prop to just help people think about light of the world, the gate of the sheep, you know, even a grape arbor up there.
And this great opportunity for creative folk to allow their talents to shine.
In preparing the material too, one of the things I've thought about, when I've used experiences like this before, it is a challenge as a preacher, because people have a book they're reading that's about the material, then there's a DVD they watch in a small group. It's like, what more can you say as a preacher?
Fair enough.
And I'm a big one who believes the best sermons are not someone else's. They're yours. They come out of your own experience and thought and what you bring to it. So I created, you know, some leading thoughts, like a sermon starter for each of the weeks, that can help pastors with maybe just a thought or two that helps them go in their own direction to think about material that helps make the sermon your own.
So you give the general outline or the nuggets.
Right.
And then that individual pastor contextualizes.
Sure. For instance, you know, in my own research, there were directions of my research that did not come into it. So I offer some of that. You know, you might research this. You might do your own study.
Suggestion or a guide.
Exactly. You might do your own study on this. So it's not like offering another sermon to somebody, but just some helps for sermons that will yet be different again and add to the experience.
And that's the thing I love to imagine is a wide variety of congregations taking this series and contextualizing it into their setting. You're at St. Luke's, it's a large church. You probably had folk that were ready and willing to help create these beautiful flaming granite statues. But for this, the local pastor in a 2-point charge or a 3-point charge,
Right.
There is enough material here for that person as well. It's that expandable and
Yes.
retractable.
Yes.
So yeah.
You know what? I I started out ministry in a 2-point charge
Did you?
in a
In
farming
North
community
Carolina?
in North Carolina
Yeah.
in a farming
Yeah.
community. I had farmers who were great craftsmen.
Yeah.
And whenever I said, "Would you help us make this, create this kind of thing?" they loved doing
happened.
it. And I just can't imagine any church where you could not do exactly what we did in St. Luke's and say, "This works
In a
here where
smaller
we are."
setting.
Because the aim of all of this is what's going to happen in a group of 10 or 12 people, maybe meeting in a church classroom or in a living room. And, that's where this becomes powerful. So it's not about the size of a church where it can have great relevance. It's about a group of a few people getting together to say, how do we understand what Jesus meant when he said, "I am the bread of
Yeah.
life"?
Yeah. And I think Wesley would be pretty happy about that.
I hope so.
We are actually well into our time together, and I want to be sure that people who want to ask questions have an opportunity to do that. And so while you're thinking about your questions out there, and you may already be doing that and tweeting them in at #TheGodWeCanKnow, I want to tell you a little bit about the pieces of the resource. We've alluded to this. I want to point it out more specifically. The key piece, the key pieces, are the DVD, which includes 7 videos of about 6 to 8 minutes apiece, all filmed in the Holy Land, as Rob has talked about. And then the book, The God We Can Know, which is generally for adults, and it includes reflection questions at the end of every chapter. As we mentioned earlier, the DVD also includes a study guide so that someone who wanted to just use the DVD with some study guide questions could do that. The book, as I think we've explained this evening, really does add substance and complement what you'll find in the video. The children's and youth resources are available at our website, thegodwecanow.com, and they're available for download free, which is a nice price. Anyone watching tonight or watching the recorded version later will be offered via email a discount of 25% off of any of the purchases of the foundational pieces. But the website is where you will find, and our Facebook page is where you will find all sorts of other helps, promotional materials, ways to get the word out. You'll find the sermon guidelines that Rob was talking about. You will find some places to ask questions. If you are not going to tweet a question to us tonight, but you would tomorrow morning think of one that you'd like to ask, you're more than welcome to send that question to the God We Can Know at upperroom.org. That's very simply the God We Can Know at upperroom.org. And we'd be delighted to answer your questions more personally.
I thought you were going to say, but wait, there's more.
Oh, there's more.
No
There's
free
more.
steak knives or anything like that.
No free steak knives.
All right.
No free steak knives. But what my hope really is, Rob, and I think this is true for my colleagues as well. I think I can speak on their behalf. We care about what's going on in the local church.
Right.
We care. And if there are ways for us to support each other and to partner, that is what we want to do.
Absolutely.
And so our intent is really to offer local congregations and individuals as much as we can to make their role focused on what we want it to be focused on, which is pastoring and care for the people. Sure. And so, yes, there is more.
Well,
there is more, Rob.
I think one of the things that's happened when we've done this in churches, when I talk about synergy like I did a while ago, there is an energy that happens in the congregation as I watch this. The attendance increases anytime we do series like this. When people are in a small group, and they don't want to miss Sunday morning because they know that material is going to be talked about that week in their group. So if there's any way they can be in church, they want to be there because they want to be informed and ready for their group. And when you're making it fun with different prop settings, I mean, people want to say, well, what are they going to do this week?
Eagerness.
Right. They want to see their small group. Now they're getting to grow closer together with other people. And with everybody doing this, there's just an energy and a buzz. You feel it when you walk in the door. People more naturally want to invite friends because there's an energy in church when they come. And that really excites me.
Common theme and a common language, You can drive home with your family or with your housemates.
Absolutely.
And all be on the same page with what you're talking about, what you've learned that day. We've mentioned that this is an ideal fit for Lent. And ideally, in many ways, one, because it's 7 weeks, also because the very final chapter is on I am the resurrection. So what a wonderful Easter Sunday connection. Yes. But I wanted to mention also another real significant connection, the Upper Room Daily Devotional Guide, that 80-year-old resource that we all know and love, will also be connected to these God We Can Know I am sayings, explorations. And so during the season of Lent this year, you can read your daily devotional guide and see that there's a correlation between what we're learning in the God We Can Know resource and in the devotional guide itself. So we welcome people to look online at upperroom.org to find...
which is an added plus about doing it for this coming Lent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So I wonder if there are other questions from the folks that are participating with us. You talked a little bit about what it was like at St. Luke's to implement this. I would imagine you had to pull some teams of people together to begin leading the various parts of the churchwide initiative.
Yeah, that's always a huge benefit because we think about, and again, with a resource that you already sort of settled on early in advance, this is what we're going to do for next Lent. Right. Well, we're months away from Lent right now. I mean, most pastors are probably focusing on how we're going to get through the rest of this season in Advent.
Advent's still coming.
To be able to think out to Lent and already know this is what we're doing, you can then start thinking about the teams, the groups that you want to pull together. Who's going to lead preparing children's groups in Sunday school and youth and adult small groups and recruiting home facilitators and hosts. Worship team. You can start putting those groups together now. So the power of this is enhanced by giving more people a hand in creating it and making it happen. And I always come through a season when we do something like an all-church experience, look back and like the reflection takeaway for me is we discover new leaders every time. Every time people host groups in their home, they lead stuff and go, wow, those are great teachers. They're great leaders. Or people who organize something and maybe step in for the first time, or they show their ability in a way we've not seen, and we realize they are great delegators.
And here's an opportunity.
Exactly.
For them to step in
it becomes
and
like a leadership recruitment opportunity.
Yeah. My guess is that those of us who are organizers are going to be asking, well, when are all these materials available? So when will the study guides for the sermon preaching be available? And when will all of the youth and the children's pieces be available? We are in the process of making all of these pieces available, and so we will be progressing in posting those on our website, thegodwecanow.com. But we'll have these ready for you at the very latest by January so that you are well prepared for Lent. But most likely earlier than that. I don't want to make promises that we can't keep, but we did have a question about timing and when are these things going to be available. So another question that was asked by one of our participants was about the DVD being used for youth and not for the children. The youth... I'm going to tell you a story about a youth pastor I talked to really just this last week who was looking at a way to use the DVD material with his youth. And so what he's opting to do, because he's not sure, whether his youth will pick up a book and read it, he's going to encourage them to watch the DVDs 1 week at a time, and then use the study guide himself as a guide to prompt questions to get the conversations going among his youth. But then is going to invite them to start their own either text groups or Google Hangout groups and just offer them some, they probably don't need instruction, they'll probably figure out how to do it themselves, but just launch the discussion the way they discuss. And so that's another way to use pieces. The children's option really allows for children to have their own participation in the content itself. And so there's instructions on how to lay out your classroom so that children can go from station to station and participate in different parts of the experience, even without the visual. And so, with their imaginations engaged, they will probably be envisioning their own Holy Land experience in a way that the DVD will differ from. Will this work in all congregations is a question that we got. What do you think, Rob? I mean,
Well,
you've been a pastor of a whole variety
I'm so
of congregations.
passionate about that because sometimes I hear folks when they will judge a resource based on the church size of the pastor who produced it or the staff person or whomever, and make kind of a determination that, well, that was for a big church, it won't work
So
for
it won't
us.
work for us.
You know, I think about when I was serving that 2-point
Right.
charge, or when I was serving the church of 500 members, and I would love to have had this kind of
Right.
material then, because it's ready-made,
Yeah.
and it is so easy to
Yeah.
do. And even if people can't afford the few
Mm-hmm.
dollars for the book, you don't even have to depend on that. The
Yeah.
DVD's not that expensive. It can be passed around for different groups. Or,
True.
let's say you're a small church, you might only gather 20 or 30 people
Yeah.
to do the midweek study. You're a pastor who preaches it on Sunday. You say, Wednesday night, let's come together, we'll all watch the video together.
Right.
And then let's break into groups of 6 to 8. So you got 3 or 4 groups. And you do the discussion guide that way. I mean, I'm so confident that not only does it work, it is life transforming, where people experience the power and the truth of faith development in the same way, no matter what church they're in.
And we know this is what happens when we engage in spiritual practice together, when we look around, look at a piece of content together. It creates space, it creates opportunity for God's Spirit to come in
Right.
and do the transforming work.
Yeah.
So what we're doing in great part is creating spaces.
Yeah.
Creating spaces. We do have a question about where to purchase this. If you take a look at bookstore.upperroom.org, you can find all sorts of Upper Room books, but particularly The God We Can Know. And again, always, if you've got a question, either visit the godwecannoknow.com website, or email us at thegodwecannoknow@upperroom.org. But purchasing, you can definitely purchase at the Upper Room bookstore, Upper Room online bookstore, and we'll be sending you all a coupon code. I was supposed to be sure to remember to tell you all that. We'll be sending a coupon code so that you can
So you
get a
don't get
discount on
steak
that
knives,
purchase.
but you get
no
the coupon
steak
code.
knives,
Okay.
Rob, but you will get the coupon code.
Well, that's just about as good.
And what about an intergenerational resource? Now, you did this at St. Luke's with older adults, younger adults. How did that work? Did you have an intergenerational experience of it? Were groups?
Well, inevitably, while some groups are going to get together because they know each other
Right.
and they've done this kind of thing before, there are always groups where people don't know others that well. They want to take a deeper walk in their life. Let me tell you about my
Yeah.
group I was a part of.
Okay.
So I always like using this as a pastor to jump into a group of people I don't know that well. So I wanted to be in a men's group, and found out about a group of guys meeting one morning a week, and I joined them for breakfast and the study. Well, there were a couple of other men. A very significant judge in the state who was looking for something to get involved in a deeper way, and he came and joined us. And so here are some guys many years younger than him who have been in church for a while. This person, some other new people, we didn't know each other, different generations, and the judge saying, this is the first time I've ever been in a small group. You know, I've never done this before, and it's always been intimidating. He shared professionally why that has been a challenge. It was so cool to see how these guys kind of said, you know, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What goes on in this restaurant,
Right. It's
and
safe here.
to experience the trust
Yeah.
in a multi-generational group, very different experiences in life, but talking about how does all of this relate to me? I mean, so I can just share firsthand, you know, how that worked, and it works really well.
I think something really unique happens when there are intergenerational groups in a small group setting where there is that trust.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're invited to do in the study guide, the facilitator's guide, is to create a covenant with our group
Yes.
and commit to one another that this will be a safe place to
Yes.
share.
Right.
And I think any group, whether intergenerational or same generation, it's the trust, isn't it?
That's
It's the
right.
trust factor. that really creates the space that we need to be able to listen to the Spirit in the way we want to and see the transformation we want
And
to
it
see.
really is cool when
Yeah.
intergenerational groups are encouraged to form that way, because I hear kind of through the grapevine
Yeah.
and secondhand about people sharing how they were with somebody very different from them, and they gained a new appreciation for that generation or for that race. We have a fairly diverse congregation, but an African American person joined a group and was the only African American in the group. And so many of the members of that group said, gosh, as that person shared about what their experience is like, we never knew that. We didn't get it.
Yeah.
And it gave them a new appreciation for people of different races in their own church and what that's really like. That's another just powerful takeaway.
Well, Rob, I'm going to bring our evening to a close. I'm very grateful to have spent this hour talking to you. I've spent quite a bit of time in the material myself, but to hear from the author, to know what it was like to have been there in the Holy Land, very grateful for your time here. And I really want to just commend my colleagues as well at the Upper Room. There's been a lot of work, a lot of prayer, and a lot of tender, loving care poured into the creation of this. And I think what excites us the most is the thought that now it is out and available, and we get to wait and hear and listen to see what God's going to do with this, to see what lives are going to be shaped and transformed and changed. And so we want to hear. We want to hear, whether it be through email or Facebook
Absolutely.
or phone calls, or let us know. And if you have questions, if there are things that you want to see different or ideas or suggestions that you have, we want to hear that as well. So just a couple of wrap-up reminders. Those of you who have participated and registered for this event will receive an email sometime in the next 24 hours inviting you to view the entire 7 or 8 minutes of the Session 2 video that we saw a clip of in our time together tonight. We will also have a recorded version of this event for you to take a look at. We will have the coupon that I keep reminding you of, which will be available for you to get a 25% discount on the God We Can Know purchases. Questions that you have for us, the God We Can Know at upperroom.org. I'm glad to answer your questions and hear your feedback on tonight's event. Thank you so very much for joining us. Thank you for participating, and thank you for your interest in this resource. We very much look forward to hearing from you and to hearing what God will do through our exploration of the I Am sayings of Jesus. Good night.